Allen Ginsberg's television was a baby crawling toward that death chamber. Hi, welcome to Garage Geek, and this is the second in a series of me going over these Penguin moderns. This one is a tough one for me. As a young man, I was stationed in San Francisco when I was in the Navy, and I went to City Lights bookstore and I picked up Howl, and I would dip into it now and then, but knowing the history of San Francisco and gay culture, it felt like a rite of passage for me. So when I give part of this book a negative review, then you have to understand that I do it with a heavy heart. So when we open the frontispiece, we have, "His tongue is the prick of a devil." And on the back, it states, "Profane and prophetic verses about sex, death, revolution, and America by the great icon of beat poetry." So when I first started this, the first poem is so playful and fun. You're going to see that there are a lot in here. The first poem seems to have been a wordplay among Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac, and Neal Cassady from 1949. And this poem just plays. It flies by. I guess one person would write a line and then the next person would add to it, and they would just keep passing it around in kind of a playful game. And it reads that way. The lines are short and they just flow. "Pull my daisy, tip my cup, all my doors are open. Cut my thoughts for coconuts. All my eggs are broken." It's a very short poem, but it's just fun, it's playful, and it doesn't seem to mean much, but it's just fun wordplay. So a very positive and fun way to start this volume. The next poem is a supermarket in California. It seems like Ginsberg is going shopping in the middle of the night, and it's supposed to be a microcosm of America, but he's going shopping like he's Virgil and Dante. He's going to have Walt Whitman guiding him in a sense. And so here we get this idea of gay poets guiding each other through time. "In my hungry fatigue and shopping for images, I went into the neon fruit supermarket dreaming of your enumerations. What peaches and what penumbras. Whole families shopping at night. Aisles full of husbands, wives in the avocados, babies in the tomatoes. And you, Garcia Lorca, what were you doing down by the watermelons?" He loves to name drop in his poems. Again, a very fun poem. Now we come to the problem, Allen Ginsberg, for me. It starts with America, and this one isn't so bad, but then we have Death to Van Gogh's Ear, then the title poem, "Television was a baby crawling toward that death chamber." Each one of these poems get progressively longer. "Television was a baby" seems to be about 30 pages, and it's just a slog. It's like a lot of these poems are word salad. "America" is a very famous poem. "America, I've given you all, and now I'm nothing." So this is an important poem that lashes out about class. It's actually an understandable poem, although it's a bit longer. But then we get to the next one, which is Death to Van Gogh's Ear. And we get into his poems that are like a litany. It's just 2 or 3 lines, and then it goes on to another idea, and then another idea. And as we go from poem to poem, they start to become more and more fragmented. It's just like word salad. So what I'm going to say is that when I read these poems, you will find gems. You will find beautifully written words. But if you want to read these poems all in one sitting, I think it's going to start to wear on you. It's going to be difficult to get through. And I found that when I read Television, I actually did it over 3 sittings. And I found that every time that I would start it, I would feel refreshed and I would get more from the lines. But as I would read more and more of the pages, I would start to become numb to it. It's just a string of a whole bunch of nonsense. That was when I began vomiting my paranoia, when old National Skullface, the invisible 6-headed billionaire, began brainwashing my stomach with strange feelers in the Journal American. The penis of billionaires depositing professional semen in my ear. Fulton Lewis coming, with strychnine jism in his voice, making an evil suggestion that entered my mouth. That's a really interesting, well put together bunch of words, but what does it really mean and what is he criticizing? And by the way, the word coming is italicized, so it's meant to be stressed. And that, I think, is one of the more understandable quotes. A lot of them, they just go on and on about things that I don't know what he's talking about. It's just word salad. It would be okay if it weren't so long. However, after you get through that section of the book, you get to some of his shorter poems. And this is where he really shines for me. One poem called Mind Breaths really shocked me at how much I liked it. So it seems that he is in Grand Teton Park or somewhere near it, and he's with a yogi, and he is examining his breathing. And so he starts meditating on a breath that leaves his body and circles the earth and then eventually returns to him. Wow, was this poem beautiful. I just imagined his breath going along and touching everything that it comes across. And he goes through San Francisco and mentions places that I've been. And one very touching part near the end, he talks about how the breath finds his father. A breath over my father's head in his apartment on Park Avenue, Patterson. And even though it's one line, he personalizes this journey of his mind's breath. Now, in this next poem, very short, called Fourth Floor Dawn, Up All Night Writing Letters, he writes, Larry Rivers will come at 10 a.m. and take my picture. I'm taking your picture, pigeons. I'm writing you down, Dawn. I'm immortalizing your exhaust, Avenue A-Bus. Oh, thought, now you'll have to think the same thing forever. I really appreciated that here's a man who is possibly fighting insomnia. He's worried about, or thinking about at least, a photographer who's going to come tomorrow and what photography does and how it captures something. And so he equates that what he does with writing and words and how he can capture pigeons, the bus, and that now that thought that he has had is going to remain on that paper forever, never changing. Allen Ginsberg and the people who helped publish his poem Howl were brought up on decency charges. They famously won the case. Now you're going to see a lot of swearing and a lot of referencing genitals and sex, especially gay sex. And for the most part, I thought that he's using these words in ways that are just mixed up in word salad type poems. And so for having won that, I don't know if he actually used that language to the benefit of actually winning the case. However, there are some poems in here, for example, one called Sphincter, where he examines his asshole, how it was, how it is now, and how it will be, and what he uses it for. It's just a very funny poem that most people, wouldn't think this way about their sphincters, and it does what good poetry should. It makes you think about a topic in ways that you might not, but also the ways that other people use their sphincters, which, he mentions a Coke bottle, which is something I've never used yet. But anyways, there's also a personal ads poem, American sentences. These are just weird sentences that he wrote down over a period of years. The final poem is about eating habits. Now, I'm not sure if Allen Ginsberg was a vegetarian or not. I didn't look it up. But this one is called Come On, Pigs of Western Civilization, Eat More Grease. And this seems to be not just about animals, but about the eating habits of people in the Western civilization and how unhealthy it is. And he puts it into a 3-page poem. which I found kind of interesting and fun. So I had a lot of fun with this if I could just take out the middle half of the book, where I had to slog through that poem, Television. To be honest, I would like to be an Allen Ginsberg curator of his poems, and I would just like to put in the poems that are going to really make you appreciate him. And then I'll have a back section of the rest of the stuff that you should know because it's important historically, but and you could like sift through it for nice phrases and words that come together. But otherwise, you can just like dip into it and then leave it alone. So as I promised, I'm going to read you 3 reviews of this poem from people on Goodreads. And I thought they did a great job of encapsulating what this poetry is about. So I'm going to start with the 1-star review, and then I'll go to 3 and then to 5. Rice's reviews, 1-star review stated, I have wanted to read some of Ginsberg poetry for a long time, simply because he is considered to be such an important voice in 20th century literature. Having read this short book, I am now grateful that I somehow managed to avoid his work until now, and I am dismayed that I finally took the plunge. But first, let me state that I have no intention of disparaging anyone who finds merit and inspiration in his poetry. It's simply a case of it being not for me, but there are reasons why it isn't for me, and these reasons are manifold. The poems feel vastly self-indulgent, demented, and often puerile rants. Word splurges obsessed with narcissistic reaffirmations, scatological, irrational, and shallow tirades. Ginsberg penchant for name-dropping is just one of his very irritating mannerisms, and many of his political topical references have dated so badly that they have simply become obscure. His scatological examinations are puerile rather than what they are supposed to be: political, psychological, liberating, and morbidly distasteful without any compensations. He reads like Burroughs without the wit and invention, just with the word salad mind and an overwhelming sense of bitterness disguised as activism. The poems are really just a long litany of barely articulate complaints from someone who feels excluded from power, and his criticisms of that power appears to stem less from a philosophical or moral conviction than from some kind of weird, twisted envy that he isn't the one in control. The title poem especially reads like a hebephrenic tantrum. I don't know what hebephrenic means, so I'm going to look that up. Hebephrenic tantrum put into words. And even though there are occasional shards of beauty in some of the poems, they feel more like accidental fusions of random phrases rather than the products of a deliberate creative force. Wow. But to be honest, I found so much of merit with what Risa Rice had to say. I agreed with a lot of it, just not all of it. Lisa NY's review, 3-star review. I can see why many readers dislike this small collection of poetry. I didn't really like the poems either. These are poems of the moment, written in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, a frenetic roar against capitalism and greed, graphic poems about sex, love, and revolution, all blending together, so angry, so sad, so hard to digest. But these poems took me back to when I first read Ginsberg in the late 70s. He blew my mind and exposed a world I had not experienced before. Stars can't measure that. And that's also a really interesting idea, because I did talk about how when I bought Howl at City Lights bookstore, it was like a rite of passage. I would assume that reading something like Howl when it first came out would have been mind-blowing, especially for the use of the graphic language. And here we have Charlie's 5-star review. This was my first introduction to Ginsberg, and it did not disappoint. It is intense, and I've already started learning more about him, his poetry, and the Beat generation. I highly recommend this as a starting point. It doesn't shy away from topics, and questions that he asks are still relevant today. Some beautifully written pieces. My favorite is I Am a Victim of Telephone. So in the end, whether you like Allen Ginsberg or not, or whether you're a fan of poetry or not, this collection is certainly polarizing and I think very, very important. Now, initially, I wanted to only say negative things about this, but when I started mind breaths after having read the gigantic and slogging television, my outlook totally changed. If nothing else, if you could pick up a couple of his shorter poems, I think you might find some beauty there. The next in our series is Daphne du Maurier's short story, The Breakthrough. As always, I want to thank everybody for the supports, and any comments that you make certainly are appreciated.